The long gallery of Valerius Keep was always cold, but tonight the chill was a living thing. It seeped through the stone floor, crawled up the legs of the heavy oak table, and coiled around Wren's ankles. Laughter, sharp and glittering as shattered glass, echoed from the far end of the hall where her sister Cassia held court. Wren kept her eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of her untouched silverware, tracing the filigree with her gaze. She was a ghost at her own family's feast, a silent figure tucked into the shadows, taking up as little space as possible. It was a skill she had perfected over 19 years. To be a burden was her nature. To be an invisible burden was her only offering of kindness. She risked a glance upward, her gaze drifting over the candlelit faces, and for a fleeting, foolish second, it met her mother's. Lady Marianne's beautiful face did not change, not in any way a stranger would notice, but Wren saw it, the subtle tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible downward turn of her lips. It was a silent, familiar command. Look down. Disappear. You are a stain on this perfection. A familiar vice gripped Wren's chest, stealing the air from her lungs. She obeyed instantly, her head bowing, the fine silvery scar that ran from her temple to her jaw feeling as if it were glowing in the dim light. Her silence, a cage built by trauma, was the family's deepest shame. The tower's silent girl, a flawed piece in a collection that prided itself on being flawless. Later that night, the summons came. A servant, careful not to look at her, delivered the message. Lord Valerius requires you in his study. The study was even colder than the gallery. The fire in the great stone hearth was a pathetic flicker, consuming logs without offering any warmth, much like her father himself. He stood with his back to her, staring out the frosted window into the unforgiving night. He didn't turn when she entered. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and the acrid smoke of his gambling debts. An opportunity has arisen, Lord Valerius began, his voice flat, transactional. He spoke to the window, not to her. To secure the future of this house, to honor your family. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice. He never spoke of the gold that would fill his coffers. The Wolf King of the Blackstone Citadel requires a companion for the winter festivities, a bride in title only. It is a temporary arrangement, a political gesture. The words hung in the air, each one a stone dropped into a deep, dark well. Sale, price, commodity. He didn't say them, but Wren heard them all. She heard the relief in his tone, the finality of a problem being solved. She was the debt, and this was the payment. She felt a strange, hollow calm settle over her. For her entire life she had been made to feel worthless. Now she finally had a purpose. She was the price of her family's salvation. When he finally turned, his eyes slid past her face, refusing to meet hers. You will go. You will do your duty and save us. She gave the only answer she could, the only one they had ever wanted from her. A single, slow nod. The next morning, before the sun had even breached the horizon, she was ready. No one came to say goodbye. The keep was silent, as if holding its breath, eager for her to be gone. In her small, cold room in the tower, she gathered her few belongings. A threadbare shawl, and a small, smooth river stone she'd kept since she was a little girl, clutched in her hand when the accident happened. The stone was cool and solid in her palm, a memory of a time before, when her voice had been her own. It was the only thing that felt real. Dressed in a thin, plain dress, utterly inadequate for the journey, she walked out of the gates without a backward glance. The cold hit her like a physical blow, a brutal welcome to her new reality. She was not going to a temporary arrangement. She was a sacrifice being delivered to a monster, a final, disposable offering to settle a careless man's debts. She was walking to her end, and she did so with the quiet, resigned grace of someone who had been told every day of her life that she was already gone. The courtyard was a platter of ice, and Wren was the offering. The wind, a blade honed on the northern peaks, sliced through the thin fabric of her dress, raising a tapestry of goose flesh on her skin. She hugged her arms to her chest, a futile gesture against a cold that was more than meteorological. It was the accumulated chill of 19 years of being unwanted. She kept her eyes on the gray, unforgiving stones at her feet, counting the cracks, tracing their patterns. It was better than looking at her father, Lord Valerius, who stood a few feet away, his posture stiff with a false dignity that did nothing to hide the avarice glittering in his eyes. He was a man selling a chipped piece of porcelain as if it were a flawless gem, and he was desperate for the buyer not to look too closely. Then the world changed. The sound came first, a rhythmic thunder that was not of the sky. It was the beat of heavy hooves on frozen earth, a sound that vibrated up through the soles of Wren's worn shoes and into her bones. The gate swung open, and he entered. The tales, the whispers of the Wolf King, had not done him justice. They had called him a monster, but the word was too small. He was a force of nature, a mountain given motion. Kale, the Wolf King of the Blackstone Citadel, sat astride a warhorse black as a starless night, a beast whose every snort plumed like smoke in the frigid air. He was a colossus of a man, so tall and broad that he seemed to blot out the weak morning light. A web of old scars marked his skin, the most prominent being a brutal claw mark that had stolen the sight from his left eye, leaving it a milky, vacant orb. His good eye, however, was terrifyingly alive, a shard of molten gold that swept over the courtyard, assessing, dismissing, until it landed on her. Wren's breath caught, a painful little hitch in her chest. Her entire body went rigid, bracing for the inevitable. This was it. The rough hands, the dragging, the end of her story. She watched as he swung a leg over the massive horse and landed on the ground with a soft thud that seemed to shake the very stones. His guards, men who were themselves large and scarred, flinched at his proximity. He moved with a predator's silence, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them. The air around him was different, charged with a palpable energy and radiating a heat that defied the biting wind. He stopped directly in front of her, his shadow swallowing her whole. She had to crane her neck to even attempt to see his face, a face carved from granite and hardship. Her father shuffled forward, his voice slick with false deference. "She is quiet, Your Majesty, a modest sacrifice for the peace between our peoples." Kyle did not so much as twitch a muscle in Lord Valerius's direction. It was a dismissal so complete, so absolute. It was more insulting than any curse. His golden gaze remained fixed on Wren. She saw the flick of his eye toward her thin dress, the way her body trembled uncontrollably. Then he did something that shattered her world. He reached up, unfastening the clasp of the immense black wolf pelt cloak that covered his shoulders. With a movement that was shockingly fluid for a man his size, he draped it over her. The weight was the first thing she felt. It was heavy, solid, an anchor in the swirling vortex of her fear. And then the warmth hit her. It was a profound, penetrating heat, chasing the deep-seated chill from her bones in an instant. The cloak smelled of pine, wood smoke, and a wild, clean scent that was uniquely his. It swallowed her, a cocoon of impossible comfort. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a confusion so deep it bordered on pain. He knelt. The Wolf King, the monster of her nightmares, knelt in the frozen courtyard so that his terrifying golden eye was level with hers. The gesture was so unthinkable that Wren felt her mind stutter. He raised a hand, his fingers thick and calloused from holding a sword, and with a gentleness that felt like a dream, he traced the line of the silvery scar on her face, from her temple to her jaw, her place of shame, the mark of her brokenness. His voice, when it came, was not a roar, but a low rumble, a vibration she felt more in her sternum than in her ears. "They called your silence a shame," he murmured, his thumb stroking the scar with impossible reverence. "I call it a sanctuary." He paused, his gaze intense, searching. "And this mark," they saw a flaw. "I see the map that led me home to you." The words struck the cage of silence she'd lived in for so long, and the bars did not bend, they shattered. Tears, hot and shocking, welled in her eyes. It wasn't pity in his voice. It was certainty. It was truth. A truth so alien to her that she couldn't fully grasp it. He saw her. Not the tower's silent girl, not the family's burden, not a commodity to be sold. He saw her. He rose to his full, intimidating height and turned his head slightly, finally acknowledging Lord Valerius, who stood gaping like a fish. "The arrangement is fulfilled. She is mine." Without another word, he scooped Wren into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The motion was so swift she didn't have time to do more than gasp. He carried her to his warhorse and set her in the saddle before mounting behind her, his body a solid wall of heat at her back. His arms came around her, one hand holding the reins, the other resting securely on her waist, holding her in place. The horse began to move, its powerful strides carrying them out of the courtyard, away from the keep, away from the only life she had ever known. Wren leaned back into the solid warmth of Kyle's chest, the heavy cloak wrapped around her, the scent of pine and power filling her senses. The wind still howled, but it could no longer touch her. For the first time in her life, she was not cold. She was not a burden being discarded. She was a treasure being carried home. The journey to the Blackstone Citadel was a blur of motion and warmth, a dreamlike passage through snow-dusted forests and over wind-scoured mountain passes. Tucked securely against Kyle's chest, wrapped in his heavy cloak, Wren felt the world reshape itself around her. The biting cold of her past was a distant memory, replaced by the steady, radiating heat of the man who held her. He was a living furnace, a bulwark against the elements and, she was beginning to realize, against the chill that had lived inside her for so long. As they crested the final ridge, the citadel rose from the stone like a part of the mountain itself. It was a fortress of brutalist power, all sharp angles and unforgiving black rock, designed to inspire fear. Wren's heart gave a nervous flutter, but as they passed through the immense iron gates, the impression of cold severity vanished, melting away like frost in the sun. The great courtyard was not a place of ice and judgment, but one of vibrant life. A massive bonfire roared in the center, spitting sparks toward the darkening sky, casting a warm, flickering glow on the faces of the people who had gathered. They were Lycans, his pack, and their eyes were not filled with scorn or disgust, but with a raw, open curiosity that bordered on reverence. Pups, small and clumsy, tumbled in the snow, their playful yelps echoing in the air. The scent was overwhelming. A rich tapestry of roasting meat, sharp pine from the fire, and the clean, earthy smell of the wolves themselves. Kyle slid from the horse with practiced ease before lifting her down, his hands firm and steady at her waist. He did not let her go, keeping her at his side as an old woman with a kind, weathered face and silver-streaked hair approached them. "Alpha," she said, her voice warm as mulled wine, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled at Wren. "Welcome home, and welcome to our Luna." Luna, Queen. The title was so foreign, so impossibly large, that Wren felt a wave of dizziness. Cale's hand tightened slightly at her back, a silent anchor. He led her inside, away from the curious eyes, into the citadel's heart. The interior was a cavern of warmth and comfort. Polished wood floors were covered in thick furs, and tapestries depicting grand hunts and moonlit rituals lined the stone walls, absorbing the sound and creating a sense of intimate quiet. He led her to a set of heavy oak doors and pushed them open. The chambers within were fit for a queen. A fire already blazed in a hearth large enough for a man to stand in, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, a large wooden tub steamed, the water scented with lavender and chamomile. Laid out on a massive bed, piled high with furs, were clothes. Not the simple, practical wool she expected, but soft velvets, supple leather, and fine-spun silks in deep, rich colors of forest green and midnight blue. "Ilara will help you," Kyle rumbled, gesturing to the older woman who had followed them in. He looked at Wren, his golden eyes searching her face, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something vulnerable in its depths. "Rest. You are safe here." He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her in the care of the kind-faced woman. The bath was a revelation. Ilara helped her out of the thin, travel-stained dress, her touch gentle and respectful. As Wren sank into the steaming water, a sigh of pure, unadulterated bliss escaped her lips. The heat soaked into her very bones, unknotting muscles she hadn't even known were tense. It felt like she was washing away 19 years of cold, of neglect, of being invisible. She washed away the grime of the journey, but also the phantom touch of her mother's disapproving gaze, the chill of her father's study, the residue of her own worthlessness. When she emerged, swaddled in a thick, soft towel, she felt lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her soul. The clothes Ilara helped her into felt like a second skin, a soft silk chemise, warm woolen leggings, and a tunic of deep blue velvet that was so soft it felt like a caress. For the first time, she felt not just warm, but cherished. Days melted into a gentle routine of comfort and discovery. Wren found her place not through grand pronouncements, but in small, quiet moments. She learned that her strange sensitivity, her empathetic, tactile intuition was not a curse here. One afternoon, a young pup, the son of one of Kale's most trusted betas, was wailing, his cries sharp with a pain the pack healers couldn't locate. Wren watched from a distance, her heart aching in sympathy. She felt the pup's distress as a sharp, piercing vibration. Hesitantly, she approached, her eyes asking for permission. The mother, desperate, nodded. Wren knelt and gently took the pup's paw in her hand. The moment her skin touched his fur, the world dissolved into sensation. She didn't see the pain. She felt it, a hot, jagged point of agony buried deep within the soft pad of his paw. It was a texture of sharp, invasive wrongness. Without a word, she traced a line with her finger to the exact spot. The healer, intrigued, took a closer look, using a fine pair of tweezers to probe the area she indicated. A moment later, he pulled out a long black thorn, its tip crusted with dried blood. The pup's cries immediately softened into a relieved whimper as he curled into Wren's arms, licking her hand. A murmur of awe rippled through the onlookers. In that moment, Wren was not the tower's silent girl. She was a healer. She was a gift. The night of the winter solstice arrived, blanketing the citadel in a fresh layer of silent, pristine snow. The great hall was alive with music and laughter, decorated with evergreen boughs and glowing lanterns. In the center of the hall, suspended from the high, beamed ceiling, hung a single, large sprig of mistletoe, its white berries shimmering as if lit from within. Kyle, who'd been a constant grounding presence at her side all evening, took her hand. His touch was warm and certain, sending a familiar tremor through her. He led her toward the center of the room, and as they stepped beneath the mistletoe, the hall fell into a hushed, expectant silence. He turned to face her, his massive frame shielding her from the watching eyes. He dipped his head, his golden eye burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "This arrangement was meant to be a convenient lie, Wren," he whispered, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "But the only lie would be to pretend my heart wasn't yours the moment I saw you." He lifted a hand, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her scar, the map that he said had led him home. Your father gave you to the cold, hoping you would vanish, but he didn't understand. You don't belong to the cold. You are the fire in winter's heart. You are my home. Then he kissed her. It was not a kiss for the crowd, not a political gesture. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep certainty. It was fierce and tender, a claim and a vow all at once. As his lips met hers, something snapped into place within her, a brilliant, incandescent connection. She felt it, and through the kiss she knew he felt it too, a thread of pure golden light weaving from his heart to hers, binding them together. The mate bond, real, irrevocable, forever. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes before leaning down, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin of her neck, just below her ear. He bit down, not with violence, but with a possessive finality that was both thrilling and terrifying. A jolt of pure energy shot through her, sealing the bond, marking her as his Luna, his queen. The charade was over. This was her truth. This was her life, and it was just beginning. The peace of the citadel was a living thing, a warm, breathing presence that had settled deep in Wren's bones. But the past had long fingers. A raven arrived bearing a letter sealed with the faded crest of House Valerius. The parchment felt cold in her hand, a relic from another life. The words were slick with false sentiment, a summons disguised as an invitation. Lord Valerius requested an audience, citing a desperate need to reunite the family for the sacred solstice season. The greed was a foul scent clinging to the ink. Cale stood beside her, his body a rigid wall of fury. The air around him crackled, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "I will send back their messenger's head," he stated, his voice the sound of grinding stone. It was not a threat. It was a promise. But Wren placed a hand on his arm, her touch a calming balm on his simmering rage. She met his golden eye, her own gaze clear and steady. For the first time, the thought of her family did not bring a tremor of fear, but a quiet, cold resolve. "No," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Let them come. I need to do this." She was no longer a girl to be sheltered, but a queen who had to close the final door to her own prison. They arrived on a day when the sky was the color of slate, their fine clothes looking flimsy and out of place against the citadel's raw power. They were led into the great throne room, a cavern of hewn stone and roaring fires, filled with the quiet, watchful presence of Cale's most trusted warriors. And on the dais, they saw her. The sight made them halt, their practiced expressions of familial warmth freezing on their faces. Wren was not the shrinking ghost they had cast out. She sat upon a throne of polished obsidian and silver, a twin to Cale's own. She was draped in luminous white and silver furs, a circlet of moonlight pale metal resting on her brow. The mate's mark on her neck was a swirl of silver against her skin, more beautiful than any necklace. Her posture was regal, her face serene. She was not a flaw, she was magnificent. Lord Valerius recovered first, his face stretching into a mask of paternal pride. He took a step forward, his voice booming with false heartiness. "Wren, my dear child, to see you so, well, I always knew there was a strength in you, a destiny waiting to be." Wren raised a hand, a simple, elegant gesture. The hall, already quiet, became utterly silent. Her father's words died in his throat. Cassia's lip curled in a sneer of pure, venomous envy, while her mother's face was a blank canvas of shock. Then, for the first time in their presence, Wren spoke. Her voice was not the whisper they remembered, but a clear, melodic tone that carried to every corner of the vast room, resonating with the power of the Luna she had become. "You never knew anything about my strength," she said, her words not angry, but weighted with an undeniable truth. You felt relief. You traded me for gold, hoping I would vanish in the cold. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto her father's. But what you saw as a burden, he recognized as a treasure. The truth of it struck them like a physical blow. Lord Valerius paled, his blustering facade crumbling into dust. At her words, Cale rose to his full, terrifying height, his shadow falling over the three of them like a final judgment. He moved with a predator's grace, stopping before Lord Valerius. He said nothing, simply looked down at the man who had so casually discarded the most precious thing in his world. Then, he reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small, heavy purse. He let it fall, the coins landing at Valerius's feet with a dull, final clink. "This is the last payment you will ever receive from this family," Cale's voice thundered, shaking the very stones. "The price for underestimating a queen." He turned his back on them, a dismissal more absolute than any execution. Two guards stepped forward, their expressions impassive, and silently escorted the disgraced family from the hall, back to their world of petty debts and hollow titles. The great doors boomed shut, leaving behind a profound silence. Wren looked out at her new family, at the loyal faces of the pack who saw her not as broken, but as a blessing. She turned to Cale, who was already watching her, his golden eye filled with a love so fierce it was a tangible force. She had spent her life trying to be invisible, believing her silence was a kindness. Now she understood. She was never broken. She was just waiting for the place where she would be whole. Her voice had not been a curse, but a treasure she had been saving. And now she was home. She was not a payment. She was a gift, finally unwrapped.